Hi everyone, welcome to lecture 23 on integrating Excel and Python. This is a special topic. It's probably the last lecture of the year or of the semester. And so this lecture, I just want to sort of let you know, we'll cover a lot of things. It's more of a survey kind of a lecture. A lot of students like these kind of lectures, and a lot of students don't like these kind of lectures. Some students get nervous about what's going to be on the exam. So for my class, you can look in the review sheet that I say what's going to be covered on the exam. So you can look there to understand what you need to understand from this lecture. So our outline today, we're talking today about integrating Excel and Python, and how to get them to talk to each other. And really, this is about how to program in Excel. So how do you do programming and accomplish a lot of the things we've been doing in Python in Excel. And there's two ways that we're going to talk about doing that. The first up here is a programming language that's built into Excel called Visual Basic for Applications. And the second is an integration between Excel and Python called Excel Links. So let's dive right in. Pardon me. So sometimes you want to be able to do a task in Excel that you repeat many times. I guess a repeatable task. And we're going to record what's called a macro in order to be able to do this. And it turns out that macros are like automatic programming. So the computer, while you're doing something, it records and writes code and then runs that back. And that code is written in a language called Visual Basic for Applications, or VBA for short. And it turns out that not only is there this VBA programming language that you can do for macros, but you can also directly write VBA code in Excel. Okay, so you can do programming directly in Excel. And it used to be way back when we taught VBA as a more extensive part of this class. We've since moved away from that because Python's so popular and honestly so much more easy to use and more powerful. But it's nice to be able to introduce you to this anyway. And one of the nice things about Excel is that it's pretty much everywhere, and you're going to use it. You'll have access to it no matter what industry you're in, and if you can manage to master a little bit of VBA, you can sort of become an Excel ninja, which a lot of people like. Okay, so maybe a couple things about VBA. So Visual Basic is a programming language. It's a full programming language. And Visual Basic for Applications is sort of a subset of this language. Visual Basic is written and maintained by Microsoft, and VBA is sort of the thing that's plugged into various tools in Microsoft Office. So I said VBA records macro, so VBA records macro, or that's the wrong way of saying it. VBA is the language of macros, as we'll see in a second. You can write custom functions. So anything that we wrote in our class, say we wrote a Newton's method function in Python, you can write a Newton's method function in VBA, and then you could have that function as a solver for you in Excel if you wanted. And so this custom functions, okay, this is very powerful. Okay. So I have a little handout that will be posted on the web. I'll put a link in the YouTube video here description. Oh, wrong one. It's actually right here. Which goes over some basic VBA syntax. So there's nicer tutorials that are nicer, I don't know. I think my thing's okay, but there's some more in-depth tutorials rather. You can go through, you can click on these links. I'm just going to spend 5 minutes and kind of go over the basics of the code with you. This is going to be sort of super fast, and you're going to need to go back and look at it for yourselves and kind of play around and figure this out. Again, this is what makes this exciting for some students and frustrating for other students. I'm surveying this really quickly. We could spend days and days on going over this. But the basics is that this is a programming language similar to Python in the fact that they're both programming languages. And so there's things like variables, if-else conditional statements, arrays, loops, and functions, and what are called subroutines, and all of these other kinds of things that are built into this language. And I just want to highlight a couple of differences. We'll see them as we get into VBA in a couple minutes. But one of the things that's different, so they have variable types, and you actually have to declare your variables as a variable type. So at the beginning you have to say dim, which is your way of declaring something, the name of your variable as the data type. So in Python this sort of happens automatically. You can just do it however you want, and it'll sort of smart decide whether it's a certain variable or a certain data type or not. In VBA you have to declare it explicitly. You notice there's some syntax differences. So if there's these if-else constructs, they're a little different. There's not the colons. There's different things that are going on in those if-else constructs. You have to pay attention to that. VBA is case sensitive, so it matters if it's capital or not capitalized. That's what case sensitive means. There's array variables, and those interact in VBA with ranges. Ranges are the thing that you actually encounter in the Excel worksheet. So you might have a range from A4 to C6. That would be a range. And then you can convert those ranges, and you can look at the values from those and get those and put them into two-dimensional arrays. There are array variables. You can define array variables. I think confusingly, but this is the way it's done in VBA, are accessed with parentheses. So not with square brackets. Square brackets is how we access them in Python. Sort of importantly, you can define an array from a value in a range in the following manner. This is maybe the most important thing to get from this part. So you declare it as an array as what's called a variant data type. So this is like it lets it be whatever data type is going to end up being in the range. And so you need to declare it as a special data type. And then you just declare that range.value and you assign it to the array. Well, that seems well and good, but this array is always a two-dimensional array. So even if it's only a range with just columns or rows, it always comes out as a two-dimensional array. And the array indices always start counting at 1. So you know how I said at the beginning of class, programmers start counting at 0? Well, not all programmers do in VBA. They start counting at 1, sort of maybe like you were used to before. So you have to get unused to counting at 0, starting counting at 0 in Visual Basic. There's loops. So loops have a little bit different syntax. There's also while loops. We won't go too much into this, but the for loop is sort of the standard loop. And then the last thing I want to highlight is that there are these things called subroutines. So in Python, there's functions, and that's all there is. In Visual Basic, there's a function and a subroutine. And the difference is that a function returns a value, whereas a subroutine doesn't return a value. So when you want to write something that in Python we call a function, but it doesn't ever have to kick a value back out, it just executes some part of the code, that's called a subroutine in Visual Basic. And this distinction between subroutines and functions goes all the way back at least to Fortran that I know of. And so they're actually declared differently. So one is called a function. You declare function, and the other you call sub. The way you might get values inside and outside of a subroutine is just by passing them in through the arguments. In a function, actually the way that it works in Visual Basic is you don't have a return statement. The name of the function itself is actually a variable, and so you have to declare that function as a data type. And then the last thing that you assign it to be, if you assign sum here in this case to be x plus y, that's what it will return, as whatever sum is at the end of the function. Okay, so that's a little bit different. There's a little bit of pain of debugging, and I'll show you that here in Visual Basic in just a second. Okay. So what I think you should do, this is normally a part where I pause and answer a bunch of questions, but that's hard to do over the internet. So what I'd suggest you do is sit down for a minute and pause the video, go back and look through this and read through this and sort of try and answer some questions. Just familiarize yourself with this enough that as I start coding in it, you're not completely lost. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video and then start back up when you feel a little more comfortable. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to dive into Visual Basic for a minute, and we're going to do a little practice problem. That's not the thing I want to move. I want to move these notes out of the way. Okay, so the first thing that I want to show you how to do, so you can open this function right here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see the typing a little better. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is you need to be able to access this tab up here that you see called the Developer tab. And so to access that, you come to File and Options. This was a similar place where we found Solver, but instead of going to Add-ins, you're going to go to Customize Ribbon, and you're going to see this button unclicked right there, the Developer checkbox. So you're going to click that checkbox and click OK. And when you do that, you should now be able to click on this Developer tab and see this guy right here. All right, and then that's the first thing you need to do. The second thing that you need to do is you need to be able to save this as a macro-enabled worksheet. So you need to come up here, File, Save As. Okay, I'm going to go to my current folder. This is my video folder. And I'm going to, instead of saving this, I'm going to save this as toluene heat capacity editable dot, and then now I don't have to put a dot after it, but I want to change this type down to macro-enabled workbook. And now it's going to save it as this XLSM. That's really important or else it won't let you do macros. Okay, click Save. I'm going to replace the one I have there because I'm going to show you what I'm going to do. Okay, so that's the first thing to do. That's a really key important step. The second thing to do is let's run a macro just to see what happens when you do that. All right, so a macro, if you come up here and click Record Macro, you need to give it a name. All right, I'm going to name it Make Bold because I'm going to make something bold. Okay, so to make bold, click OK. All right, now it's recording. It's not time dependent. It just matters what I do in the workbook. So I'm going to highlight these two guys and make them bold. And then I'm going to take this and I'm going to turn it into look more like a formatted table. So I'm going to make borders here. Maybe I'll make these centered. Okay. Maybe I'll make these centered too. Maybe that'll look more like a table. Okay. Make it look more like a table. And so what I'm saying here, this is A, record a macro that formats a table, make the header bold and add borders. And then I centered everything. Okay. Now I come back over here to Developer and I click Stop Recording. Okay. Now nothing appears to have happened, but watch if I go back here and I go back and make this back the way it was. So I undo all the things I did, go back to no border. All right. Now I click back on Developer, I click on Macros, okay, and my macro, Make Bold, is sitting there. If I click Run, it does everything that I just did. Okay. So that's really cool that you can set it up to do stuff like that. You can figure out clever ways to sort of make it repeatable. So what I'd like to do is now I'd like to come over here and I clicked on this macros again, but suppose I wanted to do something else to that macro that I didn't record. I can edit it. So I click Edit here and it brings up this other window. Okay, and this other window is I'm gonna close this one. That open. I want to. No. All right, we'll just leave that one open for now. Okay. This Make Bold right here. You see, this is all Visual Basic code that it recorded. And if you look at it for a minute, it sort of makes sense. It says range C1 to D4 select. I selected that. And then it says make the borders, give it this line style. With those borders, do this. With those borders, do this, etc., etc. Okay? Make them, it must say bold somewhere. It did alignment, horizontal alignment, center. vertical alignment bottom. Okay, so it went through and adjusted the values of these cells in whatever variables it had in the background. Notice that it's a subroutine. Okay, it's not a function, it's a subroutine, and it just executes that. Okay, so now we can write our own functions and subroutines, and you can just come right into this. This is actually, if you come over here to this, this is our project we have, and it has these different sheets, but what you want to do is use this module 1. That's where your code's going to live. So that's where you want to put these other parts. So you double click on module 1, it brings this up. Now I can just simply start adding function, and I'm going to do part B here, okay? And in part B I say write a function that uses the trapezoidal rule to do this integral. And we learned the trapezoidal rule last time, and I've got C sub P in column B and the temperature in column A. So I'm going to call this trap Z, now remember that I said this needs to be a certain kind of data type, and so I'm going to call this trap Z as double. Okay, notice it put in that line, it does that automatically, okay? And so now I have a function called trap Z as double. If I want, I can make trap Z equal to 0, okay? And if I come over here into this guy and I go trap Z, close it, now it puts 0 there. All right, so I've defined a new function called trap Z. Notice if I delete that, I'm going to do a cut and paste. So I just deleted that. Let me save it. If I now run trap Z, no such other function exists. Okay, it says I can't find that name. So I'm defining a function that Excel understands by doing this. Now I come back in here, execute trap Z again, and it gives me a 0. All right, so let's write the trapezoidal rule as a little exercise. So the first thing I need is I need things to get passed in. I need what I want to call is something like this. Trap Z, I want to give it 2 ranges. So I'm going to give it the Y range first as a range variable and the X range second as a range variable. Okay, and notice it makes these blue sort of after I go along. So when I call this, I want to call Y comma X, just like I do when I call something like the Simpson's rule or trapezoidal rule in Python. So I'm trying to make the syntax a little bit similar. Okay, so now I need to get the arrays out of those range variables. So those range variables hold all sorts of information, like we saw up here, like whether it's bold or other things. So I just want to get the values out. So I'm going to define a Y as a variant. Okay, remember this is up here when I just told you a few minutes ago. I said we need to define an array as this variable data type to get the value out. So I'm going to do that right here. So I'm going to define Y as a variant, and then I'm going to say Y is equal to Y range dot value. Okay, and that's Y, and I'm going to declare X as a variant, and I'm going to say X is equal to X range dot value. Okay, and now one of the things that's kind of hard about VBA is it's hard to do debugging. It's not that easy to do debugging. So one of the things that I think is really useful is they have a couple of tools up here. So they have a debugger, but I think even more useful than that is this immediate window. So if I close these out here, maybe yours will look like this at the beginning. And you come up here to View and click Immediate Window. Okay, an immediate window gives you this sort of console, kind of like your console in the Python debugger. And you can put a question mark and then call your function down here, trap Z, and I can give it a range from B2 to B4. If I make that range, and I can do a range of A2 to A4. Notice the syntax, I need double quotes around those guys. And the question mark will then allow me to run that trap Z function right there. Okay. Another thing that's useful if you come look up at these notes, some debugging thing I can do, I can actually call inside the function a message box. So I can have it print out something. So I could have here message box, and I could print out X and then have X get printed right there. And let's run it. Let's see if it'll do that. I don't know. It doesn't seem to like that. X. Maybe it only lets me put. Oh, do I need to put an and? Let me just try this. Let me just try it X like that. If I do message box X, now let me run this guy right here. I run that. Ah, type mismatch. Doesn't like that. I remember being able to do this like this. Let me try it with quotes in there just to see what it'll do. Let me run this one now. Okay, it'll print X to the screen. For some reason it won't print that value. I don't know why it won't do that. Maybe I have to give it a certain value, a specific one. So let me give it 1, 1 and see if that'll work. Just to see here. I will. It'll print out 1, 1. Okay, so you can see it's actually kind of hard to get out the value of all those things. So another thing that's really useful is you come up here, it has what's called the locals window. Okay, the locals window will show you the value of the current local variables. The problem is that a function, it executes and then you don't have any local variables anymore. So what you can do is you can come down here to debug and you can add what's called a breakpoint. So you can add it by clicking F9 or by clicking over here. And then what happens is when you run this guy, it'll stop. Okay, it prints my message box and then it comes and stops at my breakpoint. And you can see now, if you can see down here, maybe this is hidden by my face. Sorry if that's hidden by my face. Let me pull it over here for a second. You can see down here. Oh, now we lost it. Bummer, dude, come back. Okay. You can see down here that it has the values of these different things that I care about. I'm actually going to go ahead and I'm going to do this. I'm going to switch sides with this. Make this one go to the other side. Okay. So you can see, what X is now, and you can see X has 3 values, and X11 is 180, 190, 200. Okay, 180, 190, 200, just like I expect. Okay, so that's a little quick debugging thing. Okay, so get rid of the message box. All right, so now remember in a trapezoidal rule, I have this formula. Let me pull up my trusty little thing right here and write down this formula. Remember that the formula for the trapezoidal rule is as follows. So I have trapezoidal rule looked like delta x over 2, and then I had f0 plus 2f1 plus 2f2 plus all the way to the end 2fn minus 2 plus fn minus 1. Okay, and so that's what I need to program in to this case. So let me go back down here and look at this guy. Let me just grab this one real quick so I can make sure I'm not screwing that up. Okay, and so what I'm going to do is I need to code in that formula. So I'm going to make up a new variable. I'm going to call this I as double. Okay, that's going to be my integral. Actually, I'm going to change this. I'm going to call this, I'm just going to call this trapz sum. Okay, as double. Yeah, I reset my project. It's telling me I'm doing that because I'm breaking out of the debugger. Okay, so I make trapz sum. I'm going to make that equal to y11. Remember, it's a 2D array. So, and instead of going from 0 to n minus 1, I'm going from 1 to n. So I'm going to do y11 and yn1. yn1 and not 1n. That's because I have rows and columns. And so the number of rows is the first thing here, and the columns is there. So I have rows here going from B2 to B34. So this is going to do n1, which is the number of rows. Okay. All right, so that's the first thing there. Now I'm going to need a loop. So to do a loop, notice it gives me errors if you type anything wrong. It always pops up and says error, error, error. I need to define counter for my loop. So I'm going to define this as a long. So it turns out they don't have just a regular integer, they have a long integer, so you define integers as longs. And I'm going to say for I equals, now I need the range of this, I guess I need the numbers on the range. And so what they have here, instead of length, they have low bound, LBOUND of y, is it y or y range? Let me look back up at my notes. I'd never remember the syntax for this. For an array, let's see, ranges and arrays, array variables, okay, U-bound of the array. So L-bound and U-bound. So those are the sizes of the array. So I need to do L-bound to U-bound of x is actually what I want. I'm going to go from the lower bound of x to the upper bound of x. So it's going to go from that one up to that one, okay? And then I need to end my for loop by saying next I. So that's the syntax there. So now in the trapezoidal rule, I do trap sum is equal to y of I, comma 1 times 2. So that's the formula for the trapezoidal rule. And I'm starting to feel like we've been going on a long time, so I want to make sure that I didn't screw up. Okay, so I'm just going to make trap z equal to trap z sum, and I'm going to try and run this just to see what happens. So I'm going to come over here to my, I'm going to close out my locals window for now. I'm going to come over here to this immediate window and hit enter and run it. And it says subscript out of range. Okay, so something's going on here. So I'm going to comment out some of this stuff. And I'm going to see what happens. So I'm going to just leave the loop out and now see what happens. Still subscript out of range. Row, oh, I think I did it backwards. I said that this is the number of rows and that's the number of columns. Is that right? I think that's right. That should be right. Let's see, I'm calling this B2 to B4. Oh, I don't have a value of n. I have no idea what n is. No wonder it doesn't know, right? I could put in 3.1 and that will probably run. Let's run that one and see. Okay, that runs just fine. So it doesn't know what n is. So how am I going to find n? Well, I'm going to need to find what's the total number of points here. So I'm going to do that as follows. I'm going to say dim n as long, and n is going to be equal to the upper bound of x. So that's how many there are at the upper bound, maybe 33 of them, minus the lower bound of x, which should be 1, and then I'm going to add 1 to it since that takes 1 away. So that should give me a value for n. So let me try that now and see what that does. Instead of putting a 3 in there, aha, and it gives me the right number. Whew, good thing I checked. Okay, so now let me go back to this loop here and see what happens when I run that guy. Now it adds up some more. Okay, perfect, it's done the middle point. And now all I need to do at the end is make this multiplied by delta x divided by 2. Well, somehow I need delta x, but that's pretty easy. I can define delta x as a double, and delta x is going to be equal to x2, 1 minus x1, 1. Okay, let's try that. I run that guy, and voila, I get 1370 as my answer. Okay, notice that this question mark, by the way, I had to put that in there. So question mark there. Okay, so now I don't really want to test B2 to B4. I want to test this whole thing out to 34. So let me put a 3 in there to do the 34. Let me run that guy again. 2399. All right. So that seems to give me an answer, but that tickles something, and I feel like I've done something wrong. So let's put it in here and let's just see. So I said what I want to be able to do is call trap z in this way. I'm going to take the little comment out and run it, and it does indeed give me 2399 as I expect. Okay, so let me just stare at this for one more second. Maybe you're screaming at your screen going, you know, there's an obvious error. but let me just think. I added up the first point. I added up the last point. I multiplied by 2 in all the middle points. Aha, but I didn't add up the sum, right? Normally in Python we do plus equals, but there's no plus equals in VBA. So I do trapz sum plus right there. I have to do equals that plus that. I'm not actually adding it up unless I do that. Now let me do this. Let me hit enter there. That gives me a much bigger number. And I think that's the right answer because I was playing with this a few minutes ago to make sure I didn't completely screw this up. Okay, I wanted to add a little interjection here. I made a mistake on this VBA function. You can see that it gave me the wrong value. You'll see this later in the video. Okay, it gives me a wrong value. And what I've done wrong that I just missed is here I'm double counting. So I'm saying I'm going to count the beginning of this sum and the end of this sum, and then I do a loop over all the values again in these arrays. I actually need to skip the ends. So I need to go from one past the beginning and one before the end. So I save that. If I run this guy here, now it gives me the right value. I come over here and it gives me the right value and they match up. Okay, so the thing I missed here was I counted the ends, okay, and then I was doing counted the ends again times 2, and it added up too much. And so I need to make sure that in this loop I don't go over both ends. All right, that fixes that mistake. Okay, so there is that for Visual Basic. What I want you to do is take a minute and try and write a function called dot, okay, that looks like this and does a dot product between A and B here. I'll tell you the answer. The answer is 32. Okay, see if you can get this to be 32. All right, I've given you the key on the web so you can look it up and find out how to do it. But when you pause this, try and figure out how to do that. You're going to need to use these range variables. You're going to need to get a couple of arrays. You're going to write a loop. It's going to look a lot like this. Okay, except it's going to have to be a dot product between those two guys instead of the other way around. Okay, so I need to pause the video and go ahead and play with that. Okay, so hopefully you did that. Hopefully you got the answer. I'm not going to show you the answer on here, but it's in the key that's up on the web, and I'll put a link to that to my notes in the course description or in the video description for YouTube.